What's up, guys and gals, and welcome to Veve Vibes, where I love talking all things Veve NFTs, speculation, and of course the market. So no webcam today because I did leave it behind when I was traveling for the holidays. I've already ordered a new one on Amazon, so it should be here in a couple days. But in the meantime, I did want to make a super short video for all of you, just talking about some of the IPs that I would love to see get announced on Veve at some point. I'm not saying this is all going to happen in 2022, although I would love it to. Most of these IPs are just my personal preferences, or I should say my selfish reasons why I would want these IPs announced on Veve. So I would be surprised if Veve even announced a quarter of these, even though some of these are already on their official list of licensors that they've already partnered with, but it's just a matter of time of when they actually get released. Now, some of these IPs will do extremely well on the Veve platform, but some of them will do less so. But these are just things that, honestly, I either grew up with as a kid or some recent interests that I have collected as I've kind of gotten older. And these are things I would love to kind of collect in NFT format anyway. So anyway, we'll go ahead and jump right in. All right, so I do have a lot to go through, but I will be quick about it. So the first one I do have on my list is D&D, or as some people might know it as Dungeons and Dragons. Now, Dungeons & Dragons has been around since the early 1970s or so. It's a hobby I picked up over the last 6 years, but I haven't played it as much recently as I would like. It's easily one of the most popular and iconic tabletop games that currently exists. It's also probably one of the most inclusive communities I've ever been around, so it's totally awesome. So if you guys are into tabletop gaming, I would check out D&D. I know there's a huge fan base behind the Driss novels, even though I haven't really looked too much into it myself. But between shows like Adventure Time that take heavily influence from D&D, Harmon Quest, and heck, even the show Critical Role is probably easily 100 or 1000x the player base of like the D&D community, or just like the tabletop gaming in general. I do think it would perform very, very well on Veve. All right, and the next one is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Now, I remember watching a ton of the cartoon as well as the movies throughout the 90s, and it's definitely near and dear to my heart. I remember watching it a ton with my siblings. If you guys haven't checked it out, I've already made a kind of like a little mini-series called When Wednesday. I've already done one on the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, on what I would think it would look like on the app, maybe some of the mint numbers on a lot of the NFTs, as well as what the NFTs would look like themselves. So I hope you guys check that out. I'll either put it in the annotation or in the description below for you guys to check it out. But I do think having Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on Veve would be pretty awesome. All right, and the next one is Firefly, which is a show that aired in 2002 for only one season. Now, this show might have been recommended by some of your nerdier friends that are really into sci-fi shows, but it's definitely a cult classic. I've thoroughly enjoyed it and watched it multiple times myself. Between the flawed and like relatable characters, a lot of the plot twists in the setting, I do think you guys would really enjoy the show, and I do think they would make some pretty cool NFTs. And this one doesn't need much introduction, which is The Lord of the Rings. Even though the books were written nearly 70 years ago, Tolkien is kind of been presented as the grandfather of fantasy. So ever since I watched the movies in like the early 2000s and 2003, I was completely enamored with the movies. And that's what really got me into the fantasy genre. And Lord of the Rings isn't that small of an IP. I mean, it's gotten nearly $20 billion of sales between box office, book sales, merch, and I've spent a ton of time on the Lord of the Rings video games themselves, so I'm really looking forward to when these hit the Veve app. And this IP has been one that people have been speculating about for a very long time. It needs no intro, which is Pokemon. Now, I'm not entirely certain if this is going to come out in 2022 or not. I don't think anyone's 100% certain. It's not even officially announced by Veve by any means, but I do think Veve still has a ways to go to kind of iron out a lot of the kinks and kind of fix a lot of the issues on app, just to even just handle the amount of load and people going for these drops if they were to announce it. And an announcement like Pokemon would completely flip the market on its head. So not entirely certain what's going to happen with that, but I just hope that if they do announce it, that they do stick pretty much just to the Gen 1 Pokemon. I might make a When Wednesday on it at some point, coming up with some creative ways that I do think Veve could kind of like launch this drop. All right, and now we have Zelda. I'll be honest, I haven't played the kind of Zelda franchise as much recently, but I remember playing it a ton as a kid. I usually putting hundreds of hours on it on my classic Game Boy, playing Link's Awakening, looking at my paperback guide of how to run all the levels and like the missions and how to open all the secret gates and stuff like that. I do remember playing that a ton as a kid. Now, Zelda, I'm not exactly sure how they would actually do the NFTs. Like, I think doing different iterations of Link himself would actually be kind of cool, like in different age groups and different video games. They could just do him as well as just the variety of other weaponry that he typically uses across all the games. Not entirely sure, but I do think the Zelda IP is big enough of a kind of like a video game IP that a lot of people would recognize it, and it would do very, very well on Veve. All right, and the next IP is Konami Games. Now, Castlevania, I know, is a pretty big deal. There's a lot of people that watch like the anime and they played a lot of the video games, so there's quite a bit of a following behind it. Personally, I absolutely loved Metal Gear Solid. I remember playing it a ton as a kid. I think I played like the first 4 Metal Gear Solids for the most part, and I haven't played so much of the ones most recently, but I really want them to actually release these in NFT format. There's so many awesome characters as well as like weaponry and things like that they could do in NFT format for Metal Gear Solid. At some point, I will definitely be doing a One Wednesday of Metal Gear Solid. All right, and the next one is Yu-Gi-Oh!, which is a huge IP in its own right, and I absolutely loved watching the show as a kid, despite the fact that even though my siblings would kind of make fun of me watching it, it was definitely my guilty pleasure. If they do release these in like an NFT format on Veve, I really hope they just focus on like the Duelist Kingdom arc, because that is kind of like the most classic version of Yu-Gi-Oh! But if they do kind of expand upon it, I hope they at least keep, like I said, the classic cards with the classic characters like Pegasus, Yu-Gi-Moto, Kaiba, as well as a few others, and they kind of don't really spend too much expanding upon that, because I know things kind of got a little out of hand at a certain point in Yu-Gi-Oh! Didn't really collect the cards too much, but it is definitely a guilty pleasure of mine and is a ton of nostalgia. So if they do release it on Veve NFT format, I think it would do extremely well. All right, and this next IP, I'm not as familiar with it as I am with some of the other IPs I've already kind of announced here, but it is the Warhammer 40K universe. I think that is an amazing IP. I'm still trying to learn about it because it's, as it states, it takes place 40,000 years in the future. Between the like absurd amount of lore between like the humans and aliens and gods and demons and the supernatural, the amount of ideas that they have for NFTs are pretty much completely limitless. And I'll be honest, some of the people I've met in the community are really, really cool. These people are extremely dedicated, tend to have a ton of money, and spend it all on miniatures and painting and all that kind of stuff, and games can last for hours. So it's super, super cool. I would say the only issue with it is that it's pretty much like the least kid-friendly IP I could possibly imagine to introduce into Veve, so they might have to kind of like make it PG or something like that, or maybe do most of the characters and stuff, but I do think it would be pretty cool if it was on Veve. All right, just a few more, and these IPs are ones that Veve have already pretty much heavily hinted that they either already have or it's already up on their poster that says 100 plus partners, companies that we're working with so far. The first one is Jurassic Park, which I've actually already done a One Wednesday on this already. I'm going to put a link in the description as well as like the annotation in the top right. But there's so much stuff that they could do with Jurassic Park, and is easily one of the most iconic films that have ever been released in the 1990s. So I'm really excited for when this IP hits Veve. All right, the next IP is Battlestar Galactica, and that is actually one of the IPs that they have on their 100 listed on that one tweet that they did quite some time back. The IP started in like the 1970s, but the continuation of the story in the like mid to late 2000s, so I think it was like 2004 to 2009, regained a lot of popularity. That's when I watched it. It was probably one of the first shows that I got into where it like completely ruined my sleep schedule, so I really got into the show. I would say between like the ships, the Cylons, the characters, and like the fighter crafts and all that kind of stuff, they could make some pretty cool NFTs out of it. All right, now finally on to Marvel. Personally, I would love to see a Wolverine NFT. I would go absolutely ballistic if they did a Wolverine NFT. Though there's still a lot of other great superheroes like Hulk, Thor, Punisher, Black Panther, and even some villains that they could do like Thanos. Now, there are a ton of other great Marvel superheroes as well as villains to do, but I think those are some of the more iconic, or I should say more easily recognizable superheroes that people would actually want to buy on Veve. As for DC NFTs, I would love for them to at least complete the Justice League. So I would love to see the Flash, which is probably by far my favorite DC superhero. I prefer the Wally West over Barry Allen, but that's just me personally. I think Green Lantern would be super cool, Aquaman, Cyborg, and of course the villain, Lex Luthor himself. And that's pretty much it, guys. I realized I left off a ton of IPs that would probably do extremely well on Veve, like Street Fighter, World of Warcraft, Transformers, Harry Potter, Toy Story, any and all Nintendo games and characters, Dragon Ball Z, and the dozens and dozens of other anime that would do extremely well on Veve as well. But again, I just picked the IPs that I did because these are the ones that I just have a personal interest in, and I think you guys have a better idea now of what my hobbies and interests are outside of Veve. for the most part. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know down in the comments below, what kind of IPs would you guys like to see introduced? And it doesn't have to be IPs that you think Veve are actually going to do. It's just kind of like wishful thinking at the end of the day, right? These aren't IPs that I think Veve are actually going to do. I do think some of these Veve will do eventually, but some of these probably just won't happen. A lot like the Warhammer 40K, Firefly, some of these other ones probably aren't going to happen, but you just never know at the end of the day. So yeah, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And of course, I'll catch you guys on the flip side.